Hey everyone, welcome back to another cult movie review with me, Bo, here on the Film Scene Investigation channel. I hope everyone out there is doing good. In today's review, I'm going to be taking a look at the 2002 Spike Lee drama 25th Hour. Before we get into it, guys, as always, if you haven't already, please do consider subscribing to the channel. All the support is greatly appreciated. So, 25th Hour from 2002 was directed by the acclaimed director Spike Lee and was based on the novel by author David Benioff. After purchasing the rights to the novel, actor Tobey Maguire had originally intended to star in the project before he left to film Spider-Man. Actor Ed Norton would then step in and help finance the project. Tobey Maguire would stay on as a producer and Norton took the lead role. What I found interesting was that 25th Hour was the very first American movie to incorporate the 9/11 attacks, as it was filmed right after the event. Director Spike Lee then decided to incorporate the tragedy into the film's narrative, as the film was set in present-day New York and the enormity of the event would have been too big to ignore. Now, I'll be totally honest here and say that Spike Lee, as a director, I've never really rated him. Totally understand that he has some, legendary status. He's this acclaimed filmmaker, but for me, it's never been warranted. Now, in fairness, I haven't seen all of Spike Lee's work, so over time, my opinion, of course, could change. But from what I have seen so far, yes, he's a competent director, but I still don't think he's, anything special. Anyways, due to my lack of interest in Spike Lee's career and filmography, this movie, 25th Hour, completely flew under my radar. I was completely unaware of the film until a friend mentioned it to me. So yeah, it was a nice surprise to stumble upon it, and what really hooked me was the cast. It was an all-star lineup with Ed Norton, Barry Pepper, Anna Paquin, Philip Seymour Hoffman, and the legendary Brian Cox. Once I saw the cast, especially seeing Philip Seymour Hoffman, an actor that I've admired over the years, I made it a priority to check it out. So the film followed the character Monty, a New York drug dealer played by actor Ed Norton. Monty was this long-term dealer who had become quite successful over the years, but like a lot of criminals, he eventually got caught. Agents from the DEA randomly showed up one day at Monty's apartment and began to search for drugs. It didn't take long for the agents to stumble upon a kilo of heroin that was stuffed in Monty's sofa. The fact that the agents were so quick to find the heroin made Monty realize that actually they'd been tipped off and this whole thing was a setup. Monty had been double-crossed by someone close to him giving information to the DEA. And when I think about it, the DEA weren't going to waste time acquiring a warrant unless they had some hard evidence to go on, which in this case they did. Monty would be arrested, but before any conviction, the DEA tried to get some names out of him since he was so well connected with other drug dealers. He certainly thought about it, knowing that if he gave some people up, it may reduce his prison time. But ultimately, Monty decided to not give up anyone, which only compounded his situation. Due to the large amount of heroin and striking no deal with the DEA, Monty was sentenced to 7 years in prison. The main part of the story then focused on Monty during his last day of freedom spending it with friends and family before handing himself in to authorities. Monty was in a long-term relationship with his girlfriend Natural, who was played by Rosario Dawson, and his biggest fear was that he would lose her to someone else while he was behind bars. He was deeply in love with her, and naturally he felt concerned that she would find someone else once he was locked away. We were introduced to the characters Frank and Jacob, two of Monty's closest friends. It was clear that all three men had drifted apart over the years, living their own separate lives, but due to Monty's impending incarceration, everyone made a concerned effort to reconnect before it was too late. So there were a couple of interesting scenes that I want to mention. The first was the scene in which Jacob and Frank met at his fancy apartment. The two met for the first time in years, and they shared a beer together while they looked outside the window at Ground Zero. Now, this was a great scene, and one of my favourites in the entire film. Just the way in which it was executed, with the actors overlooking the destruction of the World Trade Center. Frank and Jacob would reminisce about old times before bringing up Monty's impending incarceration. Now, Philip Seymour Hoffman and Barry Pepper are two very talented actors, and a scene like this really showed their ability. The back and forth between the actors felt so authentic, as if they were indeed long-time friends. The natural pauses in between sentences allowed the scene to breathe. It felt very natural. And having Frank and Jacob reminisce about their past while overseeing the destruction of the World Trade Center was absolutely no coincidence. Seeing the destruction of the Twin Towers was actually intended as a reminder to the audience of imminent change. You see, the Twin Towers had collapsed and there was no going back. The world had to come to terms with what had happened, similar to how Monty had to come to terms with losing his freedoms. I also found it interesting that during the conversation between Frank and Jacob, it was mentioned that the air in and around Ground Zero was bad to breathe. This was due to the fact that the Twin Towers were indeed riddled with asbestos before they collapsed in September 2001, yet Frank dismissed this. Well, in reality, it turned out to be true, as many first responders have died following 9/11. The exposure to harmful toxins led to many respiratory issues. So yeah, just a very ugly foreshadowing. There was another great scene between Frank and Monty at the nightclub where they discussed their future. Through their conversation, it was clear that Monty was genuinely scared about going to prison. You could see the despair in his eyes, and that was all down to the fact that he really was concerned for his safety. The fact that he was going to be incarcerated for such a long time. Yeah, it really got to him. I mean, he was not only scared about losing his girlfriend, but he was genuinely frightful that he may be killed in prison. Throughout the movie, Monty had actually, put on a brave face and tried to, convince himself that everything was going to be okay. But in this scene, the mask slipped. Barry Pepper's character, Frank, did his best to reassure Monty and convince him that things would indeed be okay, but it didn't really help. Once again, just some great back and forth between actors, and you really got a sense of friendship between the two. And when it comes to this movie, One of its main strengths is indeed the strong acting performances. It was a really good ensemble cast that allowed all the actors to shine individually. And yeah, there was no real poor performance. Ed Norton, of course, was the standout. And for me, this is one of his best roles following American History X. His character was completely wrapped up in guilt over getting caught and the damaging effects it would have on his friends and family. The monologue that Monty delivered to himself in the restaurant bathroom was once again a brilliant scene that really showcased Ed Norton's talent. We saw the character lash out against minorities, the decline in living standards, and corporate greed, amongst other things. But as much as Monty hated the world, he hated himself even more for getting caught and ruining his life. Some very offensive dialogue that actually exposed some ugly truths. A very intense scene, and yeah, one of my favourite Ed Norton performances. And so, dislikes for 25th Hour from 2002. My biggest dislike for the film would have to be the comedy that was inserted into the film. So, throughout 25th Hour, there were some moments of light-hearted humour, and to be honest, I found it pretty tedious. Monty's story was very compelling. A guy that was looking at 7 years imprisonment away from his family and his friends. He was scared for his own safety. And, that was what was keeping my interest while watching the film. The unfolding drama about what Monty might do next, that was intriguing. But adding these comedy elements it wasn't needed. Perhaps the director, Spike Lee, thought the movie needed some moments of levity, but for me, it just didn't really mix well. For example, the whole subplot between Anna Paquin's character, Mary, a student, and Jacob, the high school teacher, for me was, very wasteful. Mary was this young upstart college student who seemed to always be up for a good time. We saw her complain about her grades to an otherwise uncomfortable Jacob, and thus the comedy ensued. The two would later end up kissing at the nightclub, and I could care less. Philip Seymour Hoffman was a brilliant actor, and while of course he could do comedy, I would have preferred him having a more straight-laced performance. And actually thinking about it, these pointless moments just added to a very increased runtime that didn't need to be. This film was overly long, and there really should have been a tighter final cut. And so, ratings for 25th Hour from 2002. I'm going to be rating this movie a solid 5 out of 10. 25th Hour was a solid drama from director Spike Lee that almost acted as a love letter to New York City. With the inclusion of the 9/11 tragedy, the film definitely had this quite bleak and depressing undertone. There was a subplot around who was responsible for tipping off the DEA, but I am glad that the film continued to focus on the personal drama between the characters rather than a whodunit scenario. Ed Norton is the best part of this movie, and considering his character was actually a shady drug dealer, Norton did a great job in making us, the audience, feel some empathy towards his character. If you've seen 25th Hour, let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. For those who haven't, I would indeed recommend it. If you're a fan of Spike Lee or Ed Norton, This is definitely a film that you will like. And well, that's all from me today, guys. I really hope you've enjoyed this review of 25th Hour. I'll be back next week. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And of course, take care.